I am going to invite Mark Kovner back to the stage to introduce our next panel, the Criminal Law and Death Penalty panel.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Thank you very much for our final panel 2021 Summer Forum Series. I think we're ending with a bang, as it were, a tremendous panel on criminal law and the death penalty. This panel, as Nancy said earlier, is always one of our most popular, and I expect today's discussion to be as robust and as interesting as it ever is. I'd like to introduce the moderator of this panel, and the moderator, Stefan Woods, will then introduce his panelists. Stefan Woods is first and foremost a Washington Council of Lawyers board member. He is also, in his day job, a trial attorney at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development in their Fair Housing Enforcement Division, where he investigates and litigates claims of discrimination in housing across the country. Before that, he worked as an assistant attorney general right here in DC with the Office of Attorney General for the District of Columbia in their social justice section, where he, among other things, investigated and litigated cases under the Tenant Receivership Act to compel housing providers to make repairs to their properties to protect the health and welfare of the tenants. He has fought for much needed security improvements at residential and commercial properties around the District of Columbia. He is also a former staff attorney at one of our favorite organizations, Bread for the City. And he is a former co-chair of the Washington Bar Association's Knowledge is Power Committee. Fun fact, I believe that Stefan is incredibly interested, maybe that's an understatement, in all things outer space. And if he wasn't a lawyer, he would be an astronaut. Another fun fact, I understand, I'd like to see a video clip of this, that he joined Barack Obama on stage in 2009 to sing Happy Birthday to Ted Kennedy. I think it's his final birthday bash at the Kennedy Center, which is amazing. And I will immediately go and see if I can find that clip on YouTube. So with that, let me ask Stefan to come onto the stage, and I can hand the baton over to him.
All right, can everyone hear me? Great. Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate that introduction. I completely forgot about the fun facts, so I was definitely laughing very hysterically over here. But there are clips, just if anyone is interested. They're a little grainy because they're kind of old. But anyway, back to the real purpose of today and this particular event. First of all, I want to say welcome to you all to the Criminal Law and Death Penalty panel for this year's Summer Forum. We, not surprisingly, have a fantastic lineup of professionals who have a wide range of experiences in this particular area of law. So we're really interested to get them to talk to you about their journeys and their careers, and hopefully that'll spark some interest in you if you want to particularly do any of this work. First of all, just a quick reminder that we do have the chat feature and answer box. If you have any questions, we'll try to ask some questions along throughout the program. But if we can't get to all of them throughout the program, then we'll definitely reserve some time at the end for questions. And then hopefully we will have some of our panelists stick around if you want to have a little more one-on-one chat with them. Hopefully we can try to arrange that as well. So with that, why don't we get started and welcome our panelists. So first we have Keisha Robinson, and then we have Bridget Stumpf, and then Daniel Levin, and then Emily Olsen Galt. And instead of me talking about their wonderful careers, I'm definitely going to turn it around to them to give us a brief introduction about like who they are, how they came to this work, and what type of work they do. So why don't we start with Bridget first?
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having me, and welcome everyone who's here and my fellow panelists. My name is Bridget Stump, and I am the Executive Director and Co-founder at Network for Victim Recovery of DC. And we are a holistic victim service provider in the district and a social justice agency. And I'll give you just a few highlights of what that means, because even now, as a crime victims' rights lawyer, folks sometimes look at me like I've got three eyes, because we still don't really know how crime victims' rights lawyers operate within the criminal legal system. And so for us, what that means is that we enter our appearance in criminal cases that are being prosecuted mostly by the U.S. Attorney's Office because of the unique jurisdiction that we live in. And our job is to make sure the independent voice of the person who is harmed by a crime is both represented and that their rights are afforded, and that those government actors who are required to afford those rights are held accountable for that obligation. So I'm excited to talk more about that and looking forward to the conversation today.
And why don't we move over to Daniel Levin now?
Thanks. Hi, Dan Levin. I'm an attorney at a law firm in DC. Spent my legal career kind of in and out of government at the Justice Department, FBI, White House, and the U.S. Attorney's offices in Los Angeles and San Francisco.
And now Keisha.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stefan. Thank you for having me. Hello to my fellow panelists and everyone who has joined us on this call today. Thank you for being here. My name is Keisha Robinson, and I work at the Public Defender Service, affectionately known as PDS, here in DC. And I've worked here for my entire legal career and have spanned several different divisions within the agency. I've worked in our parole division. I've worked for a long time in our trial division as a senior trial attorney, handling the most serious felony offenses. And for the last decade, I've been working in our community defender division, which we often say is the deep end of the system. It's what holistic public defense is really about. All of the collateral consequences that flow from someone having engaged the criminal legal system, we help them with those issues. Specifically, I am the deputy chief for the Prisoner and Reentry Legal Service Program. So we represent and help anyone who is incarcerated in the DC jail, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, because there is no DC state prison, or people who are dealing with the collateral consequences that flow from a criminal record. I'm excited to talk more about my work.
Thank you. And last but not least, Emily.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here today. Excited to be here with this great panel. I'm Emily Olsen-Galt. I'm the Director and Chief Counsel of the American Bar Association's Death Penalty Representation Project. I have been at the ABA now for almost 13 years. I started out there as a staff attorney, and before that I was a young associate at Kirkland & Ellis in New York doing pro bono death penalty representation recruited by the ABA. So I've been involved with the ABA Death Penalty Representation Project in one form or another my entire career. And the project is, as its name suggests, does anything and everything to do with representation in death penalty cases. We recruit pro bono lawyers like I was recruited when I was a young lawyer, but we also engage in training in systemic reform, improving counsel systems, and specialty issues such as clemency representation, which is one of our newest efforts. So I'm really excited to talk to everybody today.
Thank you so much. And just as a quick reminder, everyone, our panelists' full bios are available at a link that's been posted in the chat. So if you definitely want to read more about the work that they do, please take a look at that and reach out to them individually if you have any other questions. But for now, why don't we kick off this panel? And I would like to ask each of you actually, like, when did you first realize that this particular practice area was your interest? And what did you do to manifest that interest into a career in criminal law? Emily, you're not muted. So
I can start out. So I knew I wanted to be a lawyer from a very young age, but didn't really focus on this area until a little bit in college, studying criminology and reading some of the key death penalty decisions, McCluskey v. Kemp, Gregg v. Georgia, Furman v. Georgia. But then in law school, I had the great privilege to take a full-year capital defender course with Tony Amsterdam, and that really cemented my career path. Tony is the attorney. He may not be known too well outside the field, but within the field, he is an absolute legend. And he argued Furman v. Georgia and got the death penalty abolished in the 1970s before it was brought back in Gregg v. Georgia 45 years ago. And I got to work directly on capital cases in that clinic. My very first case was Roper v. Simmons, which is the case that abolished the juvenile death penalty. And I worked on that when it was at the U.S. Supreme Court. And that was just such a phenomenal experience. And after that, I thought, I can't do anything else with my career. So at that point, by my 2L year of law school, I knew that this is where I wanted to go. I ended up, like I said, going to a large law firm after law school for mostly practical reasons, but also because I thought I wanted to be a litigator, which is funny considering that I don't do any litigation now, and wanted good litigation training, and I definitely got that. But I went to a place that I knew would support my interest in pro bono work as well, so I could continue to engage in this area of the law. And so that's exactly what I did. But honestly, it was those connections that went back to my clinic days that put me where I am in terms of getting to work with the ABA Death Penalty Representation Project first as a staff attorney and then as the director, because it's a small community. Everybody knows everybody. And so, finding your way in early, getting to really know on a personal level the people who do this work and showing them that even if you have no real skills yet, if you're just learning, just showing that you're dedicated and you're interested, they'll see that and they'll recommend you to others and you'll get that experience. And that's how I got where I am.
Thank you so much. What about you, Bridget?
Yeah, I actually didn't go to law school to be a lawyer, and I have this sort of funny story how that all worked out. But my dream was to be a reporter, and I was working at a really small daily paper in Maryland. And I actually was doing a story on a family of 10 who had been displaced, and they were a homeless family. And under the city ordinance, the city was supposed to pay to help them get back to the jurisdiction where they were from. And the city lied about paying that. And so I was basically following this family around and really came to understand how complicated the laws can be. And even when they exist to protect people, how people really rely on someone to help amplify their voice when they're being taken advantage of, even when the laws are written to protect them. And so it motivated me to just go to law school. And I thought I was going to go and be a really good journalist that could write really, well about how the law is impacting people's lives. I'll never forget, like, my first day of contracts, the professor was like, who here doesn't want to be a lawyer? And I thought it was a real question. So I stood up and still feel like so embarrassed about not reading the room well on that. But all things sort of fast forward, I ended up getting placed at a crime victims' rights clinic in my first year summer through a public interest scholarship. And I really fell in love. And in some ways, I see journalism and crime victims' rights, like a lot of folks doing civil rights work, just as conduits of the truth, right? That's what our role is. And so I, very similar to Emily, kind of got this amazing opportunity put in front of me, and I've never looked back. I've only been a crime victims' rights lawyer. Obviously, in my role now as an executive director, I don't do any of the frontline litigation. I'm really proud to lead an amazing team. We started with just 2 people, 9 years ago, and now have 40 people, including almost a dozen crime victims' rights lawyer. When we started, there weren't even 50 in the entire country. So it's been really great to see that specific area of law really grow and thrive, and be able to offer that service for districts who are impacted, district residents who've been impacted by violence.
Thank you so much. And what about you, Keisha?
Thank you. I went to college thinking I would be English or history professor at the time. And I was a sociology major with a concentration in criminal justice. And at that time, there was a lot of debate about affirmative action. That's what, what's happening in your universe. Like, so for people who are in this generation, it's Black Lives Matter, it's police brutality, it's what happened in Ferguson, it's Trayvon Martin. Those things impact you, right? And what you may decide you want to do with your life. So back when I was in college, it was affirmative action. And I also, I come from Roxbury. I was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts, specifically neighborhoods, Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods. And that cultural upbringing was also part of my background. And so when I went to college, I remember doing what they called alternative spring break. And we went to a city called New Road, Virginia. And I literally saw and experienced a color line, right? There were all the Blacks lived on one side, all the white people lived on another side. The Black people were in shanty housing. They had outhouses. And the white folks, it looked like middle America. The Black people didn't have access to commercial products. And that experience, and there were only 2 Black students on the trip. The trip was only reserved for honor students at the time. There was only 2 of us in the honors college who went to this all Black town, this town that had this color line. And it just really transformed me. And I went to a professor at the time and I said, I got to do something about this. I need to make change. Maybe I should I always knew I'd get a master's degree. I said, maybe I should get a master's in public policy. And she said, if you want to affect change, if you want to impact people's lives, whatever that may look like, you have to get a law degree. You have to become a lawyer. The law changes policy. The law changes people's lives. It's an incredible tool. And until that point, I hadn't thought of going to law school. You know, lawyers and doctors were for other people, not me. And she said, look, you're smart, you're feisty, you're passionate, you got the grades. I will help you. Mentors make all the difference. When you're at that crossroads and you don't necessarily know, am I going left? Am I going right? Someone who's done the path before you says, you can't see the future yet, but I'm telling you, you can get there with my help. And I went to law school. Now, cultural background still makes a difference. I said, well, now I got into law school. Now I'm in law school. I need to make some money, right? I'm the first in my family to be a lawyer. Yes, I want to help the people, right? And I will. Maybe I'll donate. Maybe I'll do charity. But I'm going to be a real estate lawyer. Oh, my God. Have you ever taken real estate classes in law school? I wanted to shoot myself in the head. I was like, no, I'm done. And I went to work for a firm my first summer, and they had me doing everything. ERISA claims, you're trying to get an offer, so you're doing everything. And I worked for this one guy of counsel on criminal defense matters. It was almost like side projects. It didn't really count, but it was the first time I felt excited, and I loved what I was doing. And so when I came back my 3L summer, I did the defense clinic. And I used to run track in high school. I don't know if you've ever played sports, but when you're passing someone on the curve, you get a high because you don't know if you're winning yet on the curve. But when you pass them, you get a high. When I was in court fighting for people who reminded me of the communities that I came from back home in Boston, and that sort of triggered that experience in New Road, Virginia, I knew I was home. I knew all of my history, my path, and my skills came to one place for me to use this education, use this degree to fight for people who need it most.
Thank you so much for that. And Dan, what about you?
My first exposure in criminal law was during law school. I was lucky enough to get an internship at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York for over a summer. And that was a blast and just got me very interested in the criminal side. My first exposure on the death penalty was as an associate at a firm in New York, a pro bono death penalty case, which we got through what was then the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And this was a long time ago. I'm pretty old, so there was still a lot of broader death penalty issues to be litigated at the time. And we actually worked with Tony Amsterdam on the case. He was nice enough to help us out. And then I've done pro bono death penalty work since then. And on the government side, I actually prosecuted the first death penalty case in Los Angeles in probably, I think, about 45, 50 years. So it's been an area I've been interested in. We did a juvenile death penalty project when I was at a firm in New York, where we went around with a group of experts and analyses and tests on all of the juveniles on death row at that time in the country, with portable MRI and things like that. So it's just been an area of interest since, and currently we're doing 2 death penalty cases out of Texas at the firm I'm at now.
Thank you all for that. I'm sure that a lot of our attendees are sort of feeling the same sort of angst to get into this, which is why they're here, obviously. And I really want to open it up now to anyone on the panel to just maybe we think about what's been going on, let's say the last year and a half. We have COVID-19. What's been going on for the last maybe 7 to 10 years, which is the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I'm wondering if there are really any interesting issues that are coming up about criminal justice and criminal justice reform that people might want to stay keyed into as we sort of like come out of the COVID pandemic, hopefully. But then also as we're addressing some of the concerns that people have been raising, especially around the Black Lives Matter movement, Trans Lives Matter, and all of that. So anyone, if you want to take to jump in and just talk about that a little bit, that would be great.
I'm happy to take a shot. So on the law firm side, there's a wide range of pro bono or potential pro bono matters that I think are out there now. So we are doing a class action on behalf of inmates in long-term solitary confinement in Virginia. Just actually survived the motion to dismiss a couple days ago. We are working on protest rules on police conduct at protests for a not-for-profit. And there's really, I think, almost a limitless range of opportunities. And I think our firm, like most, try to respond to the things that the associates want to work on. And so we have had a sort of a steady stream of really associate-driven, which I think is great, projects where they'll come in and say, we want to work with this organization, we want to work on this issue, and here's the matter that we can work on. Much of it is litigation, but not all of it. And I think one of the challenges on pro bono work is to find really exciting non-litigation pro bono work that attorneys who aren't litigators or aren't interested in doing litigation can work on. But now I think it's really a fertile ground. There's almost a limitless range of opportunities. We've been doing some work for transgender individuals. So it's really whatever you want to work on out there is available. And I would urge and encourage people to sort of be assertive in finding what they want to work on and then bringing it, if they're at a law firm, bringing it to the firm to take it on.
Thank you.
I can also jump in. The last year and a half has been a game changer, especially in the criminal legal system. For people who work in the criminal legal system, specifically defense attorneys, many stakeholders, community-based organizations, what we all saw splashed on our TVs was not necessarily news. But what has changed is there is a national recognition, a global recognition that there is not, in fact, equal justice under law, period, for Black and Brown communities. And it has, we've encountered that in a way that we cannot deny. And therefore, we cannot be willfully ignorant. And so once it was so crystal clear, communities, cities, states had to confront that reality, that harm, and they had to say, what are we going to do about it? Right? Once you're on notice, I'm all about putting people on notice. It's one of my favorite things to do. Once you know something, you can't unring that bell. And so in the District of Columbia, they made major criminal legal system reform with respect to enhancing the good time credits that were available to people serving sentences in the DC jail, as well as people in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. They enacted a new compassionate release statute so that people can seek release. And we didn't have that before. It only existed for federal offenses. They passed a new Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act so that people who were convicted before they turned age 25, they can seek a sentence reduction. They got a police reform commission together to identify recommendations to reform policing practices. The Criminal Code Reform Commission has been working on reforming the criminal code. There is a collective agreement that we need to move in a new direction and we need to reimagine. Folks are saying not just reform the criminal legal system, but rebuild the criminal legal system, because you can't reform what's inherently flawed and what's racist at its core. Also, there has been a recognition that when the vast majority of the people impacted by the criminal legal system are Black people and brown people, they should be at the tables, front and center, talking about the necessary changes to better their lives in the communities that they live in. I have been a lawyer for over 16 years, and I've never seen the environment like it is now. Personally, as a Black woman, it is affirming to me. It should go without saying that Black Lives Matter, but it needs to be said and it needs to be affirmed in policy. That is happening with respect to reentry policies. They're now examining record sealing laws, a new occupational licensing law passed. There is a recognition that communities need to be whole so that they can prosper and their families can prosper, and that there's been generational harm and generational trauma, and that needs to be addressed by society. So I am excited and thrilled about the direction that we're moving as a result of what has happened in the last year and a half, and the result of the work and the activism that has been happening for decades.
Thank you so much for that. Did Emily or Bridget, did you have anything to add before I moved on to the next question?
I agree with everything that Keisha said and say that that's absolutely true in the death penalty realm as well, in terms of it not being news to anyone who does death penalty work. You can't understand the death penalty unless you understand the racism that is inherent in the death penalty in the United States. And one of the cases I mentioned, McCleskey v. Kemp, where the US Supreme Court essentially recognized that the death penalty is inherently racist, that people of color are more likely to be sentenced to death, particularly if the victim is white. It's a massive increase statistically in your likelihood of being sentenced to death. And they essentially said, we don't care. By a 5-4 vote, they said, we acknowledge that this is the reality, this is what the science says, and it's not enough for us. And now I think there's an opportunity to revisit some of that, not because we have a particularly sympathetic Supreme Court, but because there is a public recognition that we can't say we don't care. We can't acknowledge it and say, you know, yes, it's racist, but we don't care. And so we are attempting to take advantage of that opportunity, that opening to say, okay, now let's go and revisit, you know, these prior decisions. The death qualification of juries is another one. There is a huge inherent racial impact on the composition of juries, because you have to be willing to impose a death sentence to sit on a jury. And we know that people of color are more likely to be opposed to the death penalty. And so you have an inherent racial bias on your juries. We need to revisit that. And so there's really an opportunity, if not through litigation, then through legislation, like was done in North Carolina with the North Carolina Racial Justice Act, that basically took McCleskey v. Kemp and came to the opposite decision legislatively and allowed people to introduce statistical evidence of racial bias. We have the opportunity to do that more. And I think it's a really important moment that we can't let pass us by.
I will echo that, and I think just add my unique lens from a crime victims' rights perspective. One of the things that's always very important in terms of how we philosophically talk about our work is that there was this misnomer when you look back to the crime victims' rights movement in the 80s and this kind of founding like tough on crime, mandatory minimums, and it created this really clear binary, right? And how folks looked at someone who causes harm through violence and experiences harm. And that binary is not the lived experience of people, right? When we talk about folks who experience violence while they're incarcerated, folks who, actually act and commit crimes and expose someone to violence because they were exposed to it, because of those root causes of poverty, right? Racism, and how systemic, racism creates spaces where folks have less opportunity to education and all of the sort of problems that I think are being named. What we see is that racism comes up in how crime victims are exposed to the system in the same way it does for defendants. And to your last point, Emily, over 50% of the clients we serve identify as women of color. The likelihood that a prosecutor is always going to make sure they are afforded their rights frequently only happens when there is an accountability factor, and that is a crime victims' rights lawyer. It takes away the implicit bias and the discretion that a prosecutor can use to decide who they want to afford rights to and who they don't. And so I don't think we talk about that in the crime victims' rights space. I think we're still in this binary of those are anti-defendants' rights people. I don't think that could be farther from the truth, right? But what this moment means right now in larger criminal legal reform is taking away, and I have a pet peeve about folks saying fixing a broken system. It's working exactly the way it was designed. It was designed to be a racist, punitive carceral approach that really just elongated our racism and our long history of racism as a country, right? And we're seeing this racial reckoning that's forcing us to break down the way the system was designed to work. And I want folks thinking about that, whether it's around defendants' rights, whether it's around how people are exposed to violence and interface the system because of how they might identify. And for us, what that means as an organization is being really intentional about recognizing that forms of violence are just forms of oppression, and they're all interconnected, and we need to name that as a community. And we also need to, Keisha, your point about rebuilding it, really evaluate opportunities for restorative justice. And we're pushing right now with the Second Look Act, which was the IRA law that Keisha mentioned. What if we gave families who were now participating in post-conviction litigation because one of their loved ones was murdered, what if we gave them the opportunity to actually have a trained facilitator? And they wanted to, right? They were compelled to have a conversation with a person who caused harm to their family member and to their life. What if they wanted to have a conversation with that person and learn from? And what if all those parties consented to that? What type of community healing do we get when we sort of step away from the old approach to, sort of carceral responses to harm? When we really start looking at what does community healing look like? And so that's what I'm excited about. I'm excited that this moment is forcing us to not only name the white supremacy and the white dominant culture that built the criminal legal system and reevaluating the laws that perpetuate that, but really thinking about the human way that we show up in community healing and create more of those options, not just for survivors, but for folks who have caused harm too.
That's actually, sorry, Keisha, you wanted to add something?
I do want to jump on something Bridget said, but next. I don't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I just was actually going to follow up on that excellent point that Bridget brought up just about restorative justice. And when we think about, restoring power to those that have been sort of locked out of the system, can you talk a little bit more about what the restorative justice movement is and what's the point? And if there's any sort of locality that's doing it right? And what's the hope and the goal of the entire sort of idea or concept of restorative justice?
Yeah, happy to, Stefan. And you know this because you come right from OAG. We are so lucky, right, in the district, and we certainly haven't perfected it. We have a lot of work to do. Let's be honest, right? We haven't seen at the U.S. Attorney's Office the same sort of movement towards restorative justice options that move away from entry into the criminal legal system that we've seen at the Office of Attorney General, particularly as it relates to youth-related offenses, right? And so we have this phenomenal group, Seema and her team at OAG, and Liz. I feel like the leadership there under Carl Racine has really pushed this transformative way of looking at how we respond to violence, and it's amazing. But what I would love to see is let's start thinking about restorative justice for violent offenses. People have a strong reaction to that. But what I will tell you is that at our organization 2 years ago, we were getting data from sexual assault survivors, folks who had experienced one of the most intimate types of violence, right? And they were telling us based on my prior experience with the system, not trusting how the person who harmed me is going to be treated in this system, not trusting the police or the prosecutors based on my lived experience, right? As a person of color, I don't want to engage. I don't want to report. I don't want to go through this process, but I want healing. We had 4 individuals actively pursue restorative justice, go through an entire facilitated process with the person who harmed them, and have these incredible outcomes around community healing, which as a believer, I was so blown away, like to be able to see those actual outcomes in people's lives. And so my hope is that we take the momentum that OAG has started in looking at restorative justice as opposed to punitive responses and start saying, where can we apply that in the violent offenses that are happening in our community? And that can be both in the post-conviction context, right? Thinking about sort of, as we think about early release, is there a restorative justice element to integrate into that process? But it can also be at the original, sort of part of someone getting engaged in the system. And look, you all know this, so I'm probably like preaching to the choir, but the data is pretty good, right? That harm causes harm, and healing, begets healing. So let's think about sort of what we understand to be true around those concepts and start to infuse our kind of response to harm from more of a transformative or restorative healing approach. Yes, DC is doing it very well, is put a fine point on your question.
Yeah, I wanted to say, piggyback off what Bridget just said, restorative justice is the new frontier. Because the bottom line is race is the tie that binds, period. You can't get past that. So when Black communities are harmed, they're harmed on all sides. They're harmed as victims. Many people who are identified as perpetrators, not my word, that's the system's word, are also victims. And people change places all the time. Or they may have been harmed as a victim, but their brother, their father, their uncle is also in the system. That's not, the odds on that are high. There is pretty much guaranteed, because the vast majority of the people in the criminal legal system are people of color. And so that universal collective identity has to be addressed. The harm to Black people all by itself. Meaning, as Bridget said, the system is working as it was designed to work. It was a replacement for slavery, the criminal legal system. And so Black people as a whole are affected in this system. And so when you can't address the system without addressing race, because it impacts Black prosecutors, Black defense attorneys, Black police officers, Black judges, people in every piece of the system. And so until we restore relationships and until we restore individuals, because there's a lot of trauma, we can't restore Black communities. In order to restore Black communities, we have to recognize and affirm that they're worthy of a full, realized, fulfilling, thriving life. And that is why Black lives and Black life must matter. We are slowly starting to turn the corner where we are realizing that, we're recognizing that, and we're trying to do something about it. Before, it was an undercurrent. I remember one time I choked on the word Black or race in a trial, and the judge gave me a stern side eye. You couldn't do that a few years ago. Now, race is being litigated at every turn. Hearings before the DC Council, race is being mentioned. Hearings in DC Superior Court, race is being mentioned. Policy discussions, race is mentioned, because that was a part of the power construct, not mentioning race, taking race out of the evaluation. Now that we can get real about the problems, we can get real about the solutions.
And Dan, can I just ask you a question? Just because I know that you used to be an assistant U.S. attorney in California, and you've tried a lot of criminal injury trial cases. But you also done a lot of white collar defense. But I'm wondering, at least from a prosecutorial viewpoint, do you think that there's any room for these types of this thinking to happen in like the charging of certain cases or how you proceed in those cases? I know you don't do that now, but I'm just wondering if you have any experience of like how these conversations can be incorporated in that practice.
So yes, I think there is an opportunity. I think it's an uphill climb because I think it's not what prosecutors are used to thinking about or talking about. But I also agree that the last year and a half is different. And so I've not been in a U.S. attorney's office during that time or in a prosecutor's office, but I suspect that the conversations are different than they were back when I was there. Because as I say, I think I think nobody likes to think of themselves as racist or that they're part of a racist organization. And I think it was relatively easy to sort of dismiss the concerns as, no, that's not us. We're making our decisions based on the facts, and we're not considering race at all. But I do think that the events of the last year and a half are probably leading to, I would hope they are, and I think they probably are leading to different kinds of discussions and more of a willingness to accept that the system may have consequences that that you may not personally be aware of or wanted to have, but you need to acknowledge that and be willing to try new things and try different things to make the system work better.
Thank you. And Emily, I'm wondering from your perspective, like, what would you say to someone who might be interested in a career in criminal law or legal defense, but they're grappling with the idea of or the gravity of representing people whose freedoms are at stake, whose lives are on the line, literally, in your particular practice with the death penalty work? What would you say to those individuals that might be interested in it, but they can't take the step?
Well, a few different things. First of all, the fact that you're concerned about that means that you're on the right path to being a good capital defender, because I think that being cognizant of the gravity of the work you do is an essential component of this work. And I think of anyone who operates in the criminal justice system. I mean, capital cases obviously have a unique punishment attached, but when we're talking about the loss of liberty in general, a life sentence potentially, or a sentence of 10, 20, 30 years, that's the end of someone's life effectively. And so I think that, capital defense certainly occupies a unique space in our minds, and with reason. But I think any sort of criminal work, it's important that those who engage in it are cognizant of that, of the importance and the gravity of what they do. In terms of coping with the possibility of someone being sentenced to death, of a client being executed, I would say that that's something that the capital defense community is there to support each other through. And I don't think I could do this work. I don't think many of us could do this work if it were not for that community. It is a remarkable group of lawyers that do this and lift each other up through the experience. And this past fall and early 2021, the federal government carried out 13 executions in pretty rapid succession. And many of the people who were put to death were represented by federal defender offices, but some of them were represented by pro bono attorneys. And for some of those pro bono attorneys, this was the first client that they lost. And speaking to them after the fact, after they had gone through this experience, the thing that I kept hearing over and over again was what incredible support they received from the capital defense and pro bono community, people who were there, not just on email or by text, but they were there with them in person that night, holding them up through the experience. And the reason we do that, other than it's just a compassionate group of people, is that we have to hold ourselves up before we can hold up our clients. And as a capital defender, I think that's what you have to realize, is that you can run away from the problem. That doesn't make the problem go away. That person is still going to be out there needing your help. And so what you have to do is find the strength among your community members, among each other, within yourself, to take on that burden, because you know that there is someone else out there who is suffering so much more, and that you have the passion and the interest to help that person. And so when, I never want to downplay that concern, because I think it's a legitimate one, and it's one I want people to have and grapple with, but to also know that they will not be alone in it, and that they are giving, however afraid they feel, however worried they feel, they are helping someone who is so much more afraid and so much more worried, and giving them something that they would otherwise not have, that they would otherwise be alone. And you really can't mess up that part of it, I guess. If you're worried about it and you're focused on it, if you are there with your client to the end fighting for them, you may not win in the courts. In fact, you're likely to lose if you're a post-conviction lawyer, but you have the power to give that person comfort and support and be their advocate. And I think that anyone who is interested in this work should not let the fear of loss deter them, because the loss is going to happen anyway, but you can make that loss easier to bear for the person that's most directly affected.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. We do have a question in the Q&A. I'm going to save it for later just because I want to ask a similar question to all of our panelists. But please, just a reminder for those attending, if you do have any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And we will definitely get to those questions if time allows. But Keisha, I wanted to ask you something you mentioned in your introduction. You talked about collateral consequences. And I want to ask you and any other panelists if you can sort of describe what those collateral consequences are, and if you could mention the reentry navigator, the navigation tool that PDS has come out that you expertly authored with apparently some of my friends that I just found out as contributors. But if you could talk about that, that would be great. But definitely want to make sure that people understand the collateral consequences of those that are affected by the criminal justice system.
Thank you for the question. It's a critical question. The collateral consequences are endless. I believe the ABA identified maybe 45,000, but truly it's endless. Why do I say it's endless? Because trauma has no limit. Trauma has no timetable. And the trauma to clients, to people who are engaged in the criminal legal system, even for an hour, even just from an encounter, the trauma is real. And secondary trauma as practitioners in this work is also real. Why? Because what does this look like in real terms? You have a person, they're arrested. Say the arrest, first of all, handcuffs are placed on them. That's likely, which probably has some physical impact. They were likely arrested in public, in their community. That has trauma. People now, as they say, are in your business. They know what's going on. It's embarrassing. They maybe were released and told to appear in court the next day, or they were held overnight, maybe at the central cell block. Traumatizing all by itself. They get to court, and for whatever reason, the case is thrown out. You think they go back to life and their life is the same. Their life is never the same. One, when they were arrested, maybe they missed work that day and they didn't show up. I even get emotional thinking about this because this is literally life, and it's still happening right now with people that we serve. You were arrested and you have 2 children and no childcare. Who's going to watch your children? Oh, because you were arrested and you have these 2 children, now Child and Family Services is involved because they need to look into the welfare of the children. And that's a different legal system all by itself. Now, they're coming to your house, they're seeing how you keep your house, they're interrogating your children, they're asking them questions. That's how generational trauma starts. So put that on its own shelf. Case is thrown out. Well, guess what? In the District of Columbia, you now have an arrest record. You want to apply for jobs, that arrest record comes up. Let's say it's for something serious, a serious violent offense like armed carjacking, or armed robbery, armed burglary. Oops, miss ID, it wasn't you. We did the right thing. The system worked. It was thrown out. But guess what? to a future potential employer, what do they see on your arrest record? They see armed robbery, armed carjacking. They're not unpacking what really happened. They don't even know what a nale prosecute is or how to pronounce it. They don't care. It's next. Next applicant, please. I can't deal with this drama or whatever's going on over here. Oh, so maybe you say, okay, well, I'll get my record sealed. Well, in the District of Columbia, there's a waiting period. You don't get to just have your record immediately sealed, even though it was dismissed. Well, you say, oh, well, I heard there's this provision where I can prove, I can say I'm actually innocent, and then they can seal it right away. Yes, you can do that, but the burden is on you to prove that you're actually innocent, and that whole process can take X amount of months. So you're now living with this new criminal record that's likely affected your children, your housing, your neighbors, your community, and your employment, current employment and future employment. Not to mention all the trauma that happens. That's just one of 40,000. You want to get a certain kind of job? Oh, I want to be a cosmetologist. I want to be a barber. Oh, I can't now because of this criminal record, or I have to go before a licensing board and they're going to take this into account. Or I was in college and I got this quick case and I pled guilty. I thought it was a misdemeanor. I didn't know it was going to affect me now that I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a nurse. I want to be a doctor. I didn't know these things. I'm incarcerated. And how does that impact my family relationships? Where am I going to live when I come back? Am I going to be a burden to my family? How does this affect my benefits? I'm a veteran. Are my benefits impacted because I have a criminal record now? Can I still civilly participate? Can I vote? Can I serve on a jury? Well, fortunately, in the District of Columbia, you can now vote, misdemeanor or felony convictions, and you can serve on a jury after 1 year outside of the system. But that's not the case in most places. I could go on and on and on. It is an entire continuum. It's not just what you see quickly in trial or on TV. It's entire lives, families, communities, and generations being impacted just from an encounter. And so at PDS, we wrote a book, Stefan mentioned, I authored with over 101 criminal legal system stakeholders in the DC criminal legal system from many organizations, government, community-based, I could go on and on, returning citizens, people with lived experience. And I wrote a 900-page book. This is it. It's called The DC Reentry Navigator, Empowering You to Succeed with a DC Criminal Record. I am all about empowerment, self-determination, because the system, as Bridget said, is designed for people to fail, is designed to keep people subjugated. You want me to get real? It's designed to keep us all employed. It's designed to have economic incentives. And I wanted to transfer power back to people by lifting the veil, pulling back the curtain so you can know everything that all the experts know, the kind of stuff that you only know from working in the system for years upon years or having lived through the experience. So we put all that expert knowledge into 16 chapters. How to survive and thrive and get out of the DC jail, the Bureau of Prisons. What I've done 20 years. What does the Metro look like? What is a smart trip card? There's literally pictures. And all throughout the book, there's pictures, there's lived experience stories. It goes on and on and on. I'm going to put the link in the chat because it's also online. It's hyperlinked. It's available to the world. It's a game changer because for people in DC, they don't have a state prison. There's no one to tell them this information. It's my love letter to the community to say, look, you're not forgotten. We are here to serve you and now hold us accountable. Here are all the resources that exist. Here is the way to navigate the legal system. It's written plainly, it's written positively so that people can start to rebuild their lives along with their family members, their loved ones, and all of the community service providers who serve them.
Thank you so much. And just so everyone knows, Christina Jackson just sent the link around for the Reentry Navigator. So if you're interested in this, even if you're not in DC, take a look at it just so that you can understand a lot of the things that people who are exiting the system have to deal with once they've exited. You know, one thing that a lot of people talk about is the criminal justice system, is it punitive or is it rehabilitative? Like, are we trying to rehab people once they've committed an offense, or if they've even been found to not have committed the offense, still having that record, what consequences does that have? And there are a lot of avenues for people to get involved that way. So please check it out. Thank you so much. I think we're coming up close on the end of time, but I do want to ask the one question that we've gotten so far. It was specifically addressed for Emily, I believe. It says, what experiences should I get if I ultimately want to do capital defense work? But I also want to ask others, were there any particular internship or clerkship experiences, or even before you started in your current position, if you were working on the private market or whatever the case may have been, how did you curate those opportunities to get you where you are today? And what types of experiences did you take to get to where you are?
So, I mean, you know, I've already touted my law school clinic experience. I think if you have those sorts of opportunities that you should jump on them. But in terms of internships and experience, you know, it depends a little bit if you want to do trial level representation or post-conviction. Those are very different things. But for anything, I would say go to where the death penalty is being used. You need to go to the South. You need to go to the Death Belt and work there. You know, you can work with some great organizations doing advocacy and reform work in DC, and you know, mine is one of them. I've got 3 interns here attending this program today, and I think that's terrific. But you also want to make sure that part of your experience is working on the ground with people who are facing the death penalty, with people who are on the front lines of defending people who are facing the death penalty. And to do that, you need to go to Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana. There's just really no replicating that experience anywhere else. And there are so many public defender offices in those states that are absolutely strapped for assistance and help, and would love to have the help from a very high energy, zealous intern who wants to learn and work with them. And if you need help finding those opportunities, that's something my organization is happy to do. And there's others out there that also have great lists. UC Berkeley has a great list of death penalty internship opportunities that they maintain, and that's probably where I'd send you first. So yeah, you got to get on the ground. There's just no substitute for it.
I'd add, in addition to getting in there, get into court. And I think the best places to do that are either prosecutor or defender's offices at either the federal or the state level. And I know firms tend to try to push people into prosecution's offices, but public defender offices do probably more trial work than most prosecutors. And so I think those are all great experiences, as well as doing really valuable and rewarding work.
Great. And I know that, to add to my own question, I know that there are, I know, for instance, the DC Bar Pro Bono Center does like an advocacy and justice referral clinic. So even if you're fresh out of law school and you want to get some experience in advising people, just even if it's like a one-off, so that you can understand sort of some of the issues that people are facing, those are great areas as well. But any other questions? I don't see any in the Q&A or the chat, but please let me know. We have a couple minutes left. And I will, I guess, begin wrapping up. So first of all, this has been an amazing discussion. This is the second year that I've moderated, and yet again, I feel like maybe I need to rethink my career choice. The work that you all do is amazing. So first of all, thank you to our panelists for making the time, for sharing their experiences with us, and for motivating us and for helping us in understanding a lot of the things that we may thought that we knew when there's so much more to it. So I know that we have one more conversation moment happening afterwards, but I definitely just want to say thank you to the panelists and thank you all for your time.